have you ever felt completely invisible at your job? You know, you put in the late nights, you do all the heavy lifting, and then you just have to sit there, watching from the sidelines while someone else takes all the applause for your hard work. Well, welcome to this explainer, because today we're diving into a deeply emotional, highly dramatic office story where one single anonymous email brought an entire toxic management system crashing straight to the ground. If you've ever dealt with office politics or stolen credit, you are really going to want to pay close attention to the anatomy of this story, because this massive unraveling, it all started with just one ping.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the scene, right? It's 8:17 a.m. on a gloomy, rainy Monday morning at a company called Westbridge Creative. People are just getting their coffee, settling in, when out of nowhere, every single person in the office receives an email from a temporary, anonymous address. There's no polite good morning greeting, no email signature. There's just this absolutely chilling subject line. If you want to know who really built North Star, open the attachment. Now, it's the kind of message that literally freezes a room. Normally, you just assume it's spam, or maybe one of those annoying IT phishing tests. But as the preview snippet loaded on everyone's screens, it became painfully, instantly clear that this was no drill. Which brings us to Act 1, the Midnight File and the Stolen Credit.
Now, every good office drama needs a protagonist, and ours is Maya Chen, a senior strategist. For months, Maya had been quietly carrying this incredibly painful buried history. She had done all the heavy lifting on this massive make-or-break project called the North Star campaign, only to watch her manager, a guy named Derek Shaw, blatantly steal her work. And the receipts here are just undeniable. At exactly 11:59 p.m., Maya saves her painstakingly crafted strategy document. She literally names it North Star_final. Just over 8 hours later, at 8:04 a.m., Derek uploads a document. The structure, identical. The flow of insights, identical. He literally just tweaked a few words to add what he casually called, quote, leadership polish. And with that stolen file, he secured a shiny new promotion for himself, leaving Maya, the actual architect of the whole project, feeling completely invisible.
What's really wild here is the stark contrast between Derek's polished corporate facade and his calculating private actions. On paper, his theft rewarded him with this fancy new title, Director of Strategic Partnerships. Sounds super important, right? Commanding, untouchable. But secretly, behind the scenes, he actually messaged another executive to cover his tracks. He wrote, "Smart, but not leadership ready. We can position her as support." So he didn't just steal her work. He deliberately sabotaged Maya's career growth. He actively painted her as this low-level support player just to protect his own unearned prestige. It's truly infuriating. So, how does a toxic manager react when their carefully constructed, fake world is suddenly threatened by an anonymous company-wide email leak? Well, they immediately tried to control the narrative. Derek's instant response to the leak was to stand up, flash that boardroom-tested smile of his, and declare the whistleblower's email as an unauthorized security issue. For Derek, professionalism had a really twisted definition. To him, it meant demanding absolute silence from everyone else whenever a manager's authority is questioned. He basically weaponized all these corporate buzzwords to try and put out the fire, desperately hoping to sweep the evidence right back under the rug.
But the truth has a funny way of surfacing. Let's move on to Act 2, the silent witness in finance.
Because while Derek was upstairs frantically trying to silence his team and put out fires, 3 floors down sat Ethan Cole. Ethan was a quiet auditor, working in the finance archive room. He wasn't some loud disruptor. He was a guy who worked deep in spreadsheets and dusty old project drives. And what Ethan found in those digital archives was absolutely staggering. He uncovered a hidden backup folder labeled Leadership Edits. And it wasn't just Maya's midnight file sitting in there. No. It was a systematic digital goldmine of stolen intellectual property. There were campaign ideas lifted directly from junior copywriters, design concepts scraped right off the desks of interns, and chillingly, performance notes that quietly downgraded any employee who dared to push back or ask questions. Ethan realized in that moment that Derek's theft wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a full-blown, systemic process.
Ethan carried this incredibly heavy, radioactive secret for weeks. He actually drafted formal reports and then deleted them. He debated going to HR, but then he realized HR had been copied on half the meetings anyway. He ultimately came to the painful realization that denial works so much harder than the truth, and he had to be the one to provide undeniable proof. So before he attached that PDF and clicked send to the entire company, he sat staring at his screen for 11 minutes. And he just whispered to himself, "I am sorry it took this long." It really highlights his intense internal conflict, right? And his incredibly brave decision proves that sometimes the truth just waits quietly in a forgotten folder until someone finally decides they've had enough. Which brings us right to the climax of our story. Act 3, HR enters the room.
Okay, it's 10 a.m. You could literally cut the tension in the office with a knife. An emergency meeting is called. And in the ironically named Evergreen conference room, HR, legal, executive leadership, Maya, and Derek all sit down behind closed doors. All the polite workplace pleasantries totally dropped. At first, Derek tries to play it cool. When the 11:59 p.m. timestamp on Maya's document is brought up, he just leans back and confidently brushes it off. He calls it a shared collaboration environment where ideas naturally overlap. Sure, Derek. But then the usually quiet legal team speaks up. They point out the hidden metadata proving the original author wasn't just on the North Star file. That same metadata repeated across exactly 5 separate documents, 5 campaigns, proposals, and performance sheets. And just like that, the air in the room completely changed.
Cornered by this undeniable digital proof, Derek did what toxic managers do best. He doubled down on empty corporate jargon. He leaned heavily on what we can call collaborative ambiguity. It's basically a buzzword strategy used to completely avoid responsibility and disguise blatantly stolen work as a mere process gap or a misinterpretation. He was throwing out all this expensive-sounding vocabulary to deflect from the undeniable fact that he was a thief. He tried to answer every single factual, hard question with a vocabulary lesson.
But here's the thing about vocabulary. It cannot save you from hard, undeniable evidence. The true dramatic turning point of this HR meeting actually wasn't a spreadsheet at all. It was an audio file. Ava from HR pressed play on a recording from a previous leadership prep call. Now, no one knew exactly who had archived it, but the voices echoing through that tense conference room were crystal clear. And they completely, utterly shattered Derek's elaborate defense strategy once and for all. The recording plays Derek's voice clear as day, saying, "Maya is useful, but she asks too many ownership questions." And then Olivia, another top executive, coldly replies, "Then do not put her in the room until the client signs." Wow, that was the precise moment Derek completely lost the room. Because look, you can't blame metadata for that. You can't claim that's a collaborative process gap. This audio proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was absolutely no better context for what they did. It was a deliberate, calculated suppression of top talent, plain and simple.
And that leads us to Act 4, the fallout and the architecture.
The consequences were incredibly swift. By the end of that very day, Derek's building access was suspended, pending a full investigation, and Olivia was immediately placed on administrative leave. That heavy, suffocating corporate silence was finally broken. But what is truly, deeply remarkable to me is how Maya reacted to her vindication. She didn't channel her energy into gloating or revenge or saying, "I told you so." Instead, she channeled it into architecture. She stayed late at the office again, but this time it was to write a proposal for a fairer system. She drafted an internal credit policy featuring time-stamped ownership logs, visible contribution records, and transparent review notes. She realized that if a toxic system was built by a broken process, a fair one had to be actively built to prevent this kind of theft from ever happening again. Later that evening, a final, truly profound exchange happened between our silent witness and our protagonist. Ethan emailed Maya privately, and he said, "I hope this gives you back something they tried to take." Maya's reply? "It's just incredible." She wrote back, "You didn't give me back my work. I never lost that. You gave the room a reason to stop pretending." It so beautifully illustrates that Maya's true victory wasn't just about getting her name back on a PowerPoint. It was the total, utter destruction of the toxic illusion that had been holding that entire office hostage.
So the absolute crucial lesson to take away from all of this is simply borrowed credit becomes debt. In any workplace, sure, the official, polished corporate history might win for a little while. It's got the fancy titles, it's got the executive access, it has the clean professional email signatures, but that official history will always eventually be challenged by the quiet witnesses who remember the truth. The people who stay late, who fix the broken work, and who swallow the insult day after day. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question to reflect on. Are you building your career on real work, or are you just accumulating debt in someone else's name? Because as Derek Shaw learned the very hard way, one day the bill always arrives in everyone's inbox. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep doing the real work, and I will see you next time.